My grandmother, Ethel, died at the age of 92. She smoked 20 cigarettes a day for around 60 years. Her diet was pretty terrible, to be honest. She was overweight. She had a vodka and water every night without fail. But throughout her years, she had a great social life. Every single day, multiple times a day, to be honest, towards the end of her life, she had family and friends visiting her. She was deeply, deeply social and engaged. And I really do think that's a big reason why she lived so long. On the flip side, I've seen patients come into the emergency department who've done everything right. They've eaten very cleanly, they've exercised religiously, they've never touched a cigarette, they've had great social lives, and they've had massive heart attacks or strokes in their 40s. Medicine isn't binary like that. A lot of when we die comes down to pure luck, to genetics, to things outside of our control. All we can really do is try to stack the deck in our favour, try to reduce our risk and give ourselves the best possible chance. You could smoke, you could drink, you could eat junk food, you could live alone and make it to 100. You could also be the healthiest and most social person in the world and drop dead at 45. But when we talk about longevity research, we're talking about population level data. We're talking about what happens on average across thousands and thousands of people. And on average, people who have strong, deep social relationships live significantly longer than people who are isolated. This is what the research tells us. It doesn't mean isolation guarantees poor outcomes, and it doesn't mean that connection guarantees longevity. I'm sure all of you will know someone who lives alone but is thriving in old age. What this means is that on average, and this is important, on average, connection tends to tilt the odds in a positive direction. And I say that not as a judgment, not as a prediction about any individual, but as an encouragement, because social connection is one of the few longevity factors that most of us can still improve at any age. Now, my second ever long form video that I published back in December was about these 7 longevity habits, and one of them was social connection. That video got a ton of pushback. People said I was being soft, that loneliness was just a feelings issue, that it didn't belong in the same conversation as diet or exercise. But what really stood out to me were the hundreds of comments from people saying things like, I live alone and I'm perfectly fine, or I don't have many friends and I'm not lonely. And it felt like a lot of people took what I said as a personal attack. Like I was telling them that they were definitely going to die early because they live alone, or because they're not married, or because they don't have massive social circles. And honestly, that's not what I'm saying at all. If you live alone, if you're unmarried, if you're divorced, if you don't have a ton of close friends, but you still get this feeling of safety, of value, of purpose and engagement from other areas of your life, maybe from your work, from your hobbies, maybe from a couple of really solid friendships, even though they're not frequent, then clearly you may be an exception. Nothing in medicine is black and white. But here's the thing. My job as a doctor isn't to tell you what you want to hear. It's to give you the facts, to explain what the population level data shows, and then let you make informed decisions about your own life. So this video is dedicated purely to that one habit, to social connection and isolation. And I want to show you exactly what the evidence says without sugarcoating it, but also without making you feel like you're doomed if you prefer your own company. Because what I'm about to share with you might completely change how you think about your health and allow you to make some changes that, according to the data, could add years to your life. So, most people think that loneliness is an emotional problem. They think it's something that makes you feel a bit sad, maybe a bit low, but ultimately it's just a mood that comes and goes. That's not what loneliness is. Loneliness is a physiological stress state. Your body doesn't care whether you're being chased by a predator or whether you're sitting alone in your flat or apartment feeling disconnected from the world. Both situations trigger the same ancient survival mechanisms, the same threat response that kept our ancestors alive when danger was everywhere. If loneliness was a drug, it would be pulled off the shelves immediately. It would be classed as toxic, and Here's the flip side. If connection was a pill, if I could bottle up the feeling of having strong, safe relationships and sell it to you, it would probably be the most powerful longevity drug ever discovered. I'm not exaggerating here. Across decades and decades of research involving hundreds of thousands of people, social isolation predicts earlier death more reliably than obesity, more reliably than physical inactivity, and in some studies, it's comparable to smoking. We're not talking about motivation, we're not talking about mindset or positive thinking here, or whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. We're talking about survival. And the data is crystal clear. Chronic disconnection, feeling like you don't have safe, supportive relationships, changes your biology in ways that directly shorten your lifespan. And the scary part is that most people walking around feeling isolated have absolutely no idea that it's doing this to them. Before we go any further, it's probably worth just clarifying exactly what we're talking about, because this is where a lot of the confusion and pushback actually comes from. There's a difference between being alone, feeling lonely, and feeling socially unsafe. These aren't the same thing. Being alone means you physically don't have people around you. Feeling lonely means that you perceive a gap between the social connection that you want and what you have. Feeling socially unsafe means you don't have relationships where you can be vulnerable, where you can feel seen and supported. What matters most to your biology is that last one. Biology tracks perceived social safety, not headcount. You can live alone and feel completely regulated. You can feel safe and content. You can also live with a partner. You can have colleagues. You can see people every day and still feel profoundly isolated. The key is whether your nervous system registers that you have emotionally safe relationships. If it doesn't, your body stays in a defensive state, and that has consequences. So let's talk about the research then. So this isn't based on one single study or one researcher's theory. In 2010, a landmark meta-analysis was published that combined data from 148 different studies involving more than 300,000 participants. The finding was clear. People with strong social relationships had a 50% higher likelihood of survival over the study period compared to those with weaker social ties. To put that into perspective, that's comparable to quitting smoking. It's a bigger effect than many of the things that we obsess over, like specific diets or supplement regimes. This result has been replicated across different populations, different countries, and different age groups. We see the same signal in studies looking at cardiovascular disease, dementia, cancer outcomes, and general aging cohorts. Same pattern, different contexts. The consistency here is what makes this so compelling. It's not an anomaly. It's a fundamental feature of human biology, and this makes it very difficult to argue against. One of the longest running studies on human health is the Harvard study of adult development, which has followed people for over 85 years across multiple generations. When researchers analysed what predicted long-term health and happiness, the answer wasn't income, it wasn't career success, it wasn't fame or status. The best predictor of long-term health was the quality of people's relationships. Specifically, warm, secure relationships where people felt genuinely supported. What's powerful about this study is the timescale. We're not talking about a 5-year follow-up. We're talking about people tracked across their entire adult lives, and the pattern held true. People who had close, supportive relationships at the age of 50 were healthier at the age of 18. People who were isolated at the age of 50, even if they were physically healthy at the time, showed faster decline. The relationship between social connection and physical health isn't incidental, it's causal. So what's actually happening inside your body when you're chronically isolated? Well, let's start with inflammation, which by now most of you will have probably heard of. When your brain perceives that you're socially unsafe, your immune system shifts into what we call a conserved transcriptional response to adversity. Essentially, your body assumes that you're in a hostile environment where you might get injured or infected. So it ramps up inflammatory pathways to prepare for threats. In the short term, this is adaptive. If you're really in danger, then having a more reactive immune system helps you to survive. But when this state becomes chronic, meaning sustained over a long period, it's destructive. Chronic, low-grade inflammation drives almost every major age-related disease that we know of. It accelerates atherosclerosis, which leads to heart attacks and strokes. It worsens insulin resistance, worsening your diabetes risk. It creates an environment that allows cancer cells to grow more easily. It damages brain tissue, contributing to cognitive decline and dementia. Loneliness doesn't just make you feel bad. It changes your biological terrain in ways that actively promotes disease. And we can measure this in your blood. People who report feeling lonely have higher levels of inflammatory markers like C-reactive protein, higher interleukin-6, more circulating inflammatory cytokines. Their bodies are in a constant state of low-level emergency, and that literally wears you down over time, even if you feel fine. Now, beyond inflammation, isolation affects how your stress system functions as well. Social connection is one of the primary ways your nervous system knows that it's safe. When you have secure relationships, your body can relax. Your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, can do its job. But when you're chronically isolated, your threat detection circuitry stays active. This means chronically elevated cortisol, your primary stress hormone. High cortisol over long periods breaks down muscle, it increases abdominal fat, it disrupts blood sugar regulation, and it suppresses your immune system. It also lowers heart rate variability, which I've mentioned a few times in other videos, which is a marker of how well your nervous system can adapt to stress. People with a low HRV are at higher risk for cardiovascular events and have worse outcomes after illness. Sleep architecture gets disrupted as well. When your stress system is hyperactive, you spend less time in deep sleep and REM sleep, the stages where your body repairs tissue and consolidates memory. Growth hormone, which is released during these deep sleep stages, also drops. This accelerates biological aging even further. You wake up less restored. Your body doesn't repair itself as effectively. And over years, this compounds into measurable decline. And remember, we're talking about population level data. We're talking about what happens on average. Another critical mechanism here is immune surveillance. So your body has specialized cells called natural killer cells. It's a great name. And these patrol for viruses and cancer cells throughout your body. They're part of your first line of defense. And studies show that people who feel lonely have lower natural killer cell activity. Their immune systems are less effective at detecting and destroying abnormal cells. This isn't trivial. Lower natural killer cell function is associated with higher rates of viral infections and worse cancer outcomes. If your immune system can't effectively clear out cells that are turning cancerous, those cells have a better chance of proliferating. Loneliness doesn't just make you more susceptible to getting sick, it weakens your internal security system, the one that's supposed to catch problems before they become life-threatening. When we look at specific diseases, things get even more interesting. Social isolation is associated with about a 30% higher risk of coronary heart disease and stroke. And that's after controlling for traditional risk factors like smoking, like blood pressure, like cholesterol. People who are isolated are more likely to develop dementia, and once they have it, their cognitive decline is even faster. They have worse functional decline as they age, meaning that they lose the ability to do daily activities earlier than people who are connected. Recovery after illness is slower as well. If you have a heart attack and you're socially isolated, then your risk of dying in the following months is significantly higher than someone with strong social support, even if the initial medical treatment is identical. What this suggests is that social connection affects not just whether you get sick, but how your body responds when you do. Social isolation doesn't just correlate with disease, it appears to be driving it through multiple biological pathways simultaneously. Now, let's move on to talking about something that often gets overlooked when we discuss social connection and health. There's a behavioural layer here that's incredibly important. Imagine two people of the same age. Person A sees family and friends regularly and has a social routine built into their week. Person B spends most days alone. Even if neither of them goes to the gym or does formal exercise, person A is getting significantly more movement throughout the day. When you're socially engaged, you're getting up more often. You're leaving the house to meet people. You're walking to the kitchen or the toilet or cafes or friends' homes to community spaces. You're standing while you talk, even if it's just in the house. Gesturing with your hands, using facial muscles to express yourself, shifting your posture as you engage in conversation. This is low-level movement happening all day long. Tiny energy burns, tiny muscle activations, tiny stimulations of your nervous system. These small movements compound. Your muscles stay active instead of just sitting dormant. Your joints stay lubricated from regular use. Your cardiovascular system gets gentle, repeated stimulation. This isn't exercise in the traditional sense, it's baseline activity, and it's something our bodies are designed to do constantly. Humans evolved in social groups where interaction meant movement. Modern isolation removes that automatic movement layer, and your body pays the price. There's also a cognitive dimension that's really easy to miss here. Conversation is cognitively demanding. When you're talking with someone, your brain is doing multiple things at the same time. You're listening to what they're saying, you're interpreting tone and body language, you're recalling relevant memories, you're forming responses, you're predicting what they might say next and updating your beliefs based on the new information. This is continuous brain training. Someone who's socially engaged has constant micro challenges for their brain. They're navigating social dynamics, reading emotional cues, they're holding complex conversations. Now, someone who's isolated, even if they're content and happy, often has long stretches of low cognitive demand. They're not getting that same level of stimulation. We know that brain stimulation protects cognitive function. It maintains processing speeds, strengthens memory networks, supports executive function. Lower cognitive engagement is associated with faster cognitive aging. And this likely contributes to why social isolation is such a strong risk factor for dementia. Your brain, like your muscles, need to be used regularly to stay healthy. And social interaction provides this natural, rich form of cognitive exercise that you don't get from being alone. And here's another really interesting point. Socially connected people tend to eat differently. Not necessarily better in every way, obviously, but differently in ways that matter. When you eat with others regularly, you're exposed to wider food environments. You share meals, you see what other people are eating, you encounter more variety. You're less likely to default to the same convenience food every single day. People who eat socially tend to have higher fibre intake, more colourful plates with different vegetables, and less reliance on ultra-processed snacks eaten alone in front of the TV. It's not that they're trying to eat perfectly, it's that their social life naturally nudges them towards better average eating patterns. And better average eating, even if it's far from perfect, has long-term health benefits. If you're isolated, you're more likely to skip meals, to eat the same things repeatedly, or rely on quick, easy options that don't require preparation or cleanup. Over time, these tiny differences in dietary variety and quality add up. It's another way that social connection indirectly protects your health without you even realizing it. And look, I know that some of you listening to this who live alone but don't feel isolated might be feeling irritated or angry by that. You might be thinking, I live alone, I cook my own meals, I eat well, I look after myself. How dare you generalize or put me into that category like that? And that's completely fair because I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about averages. I'm talking about the patterns that show up across large populations. And the very fact that you're watching this video about longevity, thinking about your health, trying to understand these mechanisms, already puts you in a very different group. None of this is meant as a label, and none of it may apply to you at all. Anyway, what we're seeing here is a behavioral amplification loop. Social connection tends to improve movement, diet quality, sleep routines, healthcare engagement. These aren't separate issues, they're all interconnected. When you're socially engaged, you're more likely to notice if something's wrong and actually go to the doctor. You're more likely to maintain regular sleep and wake times because you have commitments. You're more likely to move and eat in ways that support long-term health. Then on top of that, you have the direct biological effects that we talked about earlier, things like lower inflammation, better stress system regulation, stronger immune function. These two layers, behavioral and biological, they all reinforce each other. The combined impact is far greater than either one alone. This is why social isolation is such a powerful predictor of early death. It's not just one mechanism, it's multiple mechanisms working together to accelerate aging and disease. It's important to emphasize that we're not talking about the number of friends that you have or how often you socialize. You don't need to be surrounded by people constantly. You don't need a huge social circle. I certainly don't have that. What matters is having at least one or two emotionally safe relationships. Relationships where you don't have to perform, where you don't have to pretend, where you can be vulnerable and feel supported. Interestingly, high conflict relationships can be worse for your health than being single. If you're in a relationship that's constantly stressful, where you feel criticized or unsupported, well, that activates the same threat circuitry as isolation. Your body stays in defense mode. The benefit of connection comes from safety, not just proximity. This is why some people can be perfectly content living alone. They don't feel lonely because they have secure connections, even if they don't see those people every single day, and that's fine. They know support is there if they need it. That sense of security is what regulates your nervous system and keeps your biology in check. Some people just thrive in solitude. They feel calm, they feel regulated and content spending time alone. And here's the critical point. They're not lonely. The health risk isn't about being alone. It's about wanting connection but lacking it. It's about feeling unseen, unsupported, or socially unsafe. Your subjective experience is what drives your physiology. If you feel genuinely okay being alone, your body isn't in a state of chronic stress. But if you're isolated and you wish you weren't, if you feel disconnected and don't know how to change it, that's when the biological consequences start to accumulate. Modern society has made this much worse. We now have more single occupancy housing than ever before. Remote work means that many people go entire days without face-to-face interaction. People can literally work from their beds on their own. Car commuting isolates us in metal boxes instead of walking or taking public transport where we encounter people. Screen-based connection has partially substituted for in-person interaction, but it doesn't provide the same physiological regulation. We didn't become weaker as humans. We've engineered isolation into our environment, and now we're seeing the health costs. When researchers study the blue zones, the region around the world where people live significantly longer than average, very often up to 90 or 100, one pattern stands out really clearly. Connection isn't just something that people have to schedule. It's built into the structure of daily life. Families eat together. Multiple generations live in the same household or nearby. There are daily interactions with neighbours, regular community gatherings, shared responsibilities that require cooperation. Isolation in these environments is structurally rare. You can't easily be disconnected because the way life is organised naturally brings people together. This isn't about people in the blue zones being more social by personality. It's about their environment making connection the default rather than something that you have to work to create. So what does this mean practically for you? Well, the answer isn't to suddenly make lots of friends or force yourself into constant social situations if that's not who you are. The most effective approach is to strengthen one relationship. Pick someone that you already know, someone you feel reasonably safe with, and increase the quality and consistency of that connection. I say this as someone who only has a small number of really close friends. On the flip side, I know plenty of people who actually thrive off seeing people every single day. They feel energized by being around others, and that's just how they're wired. I'm not like that, and there's probably even an argument that for some people, the constant need to be around others can sometimes be a coping mechanism for something deeper. The key point is having at least one person who you genuinely care about, and who you feel cares about you as well. That might look very simple. It could be just a regular walk with a friend, a shared meal once a week, a weekly phone call where you actually talk about things that matter, an honest conversation where you're not performing or pretending. Consistency matters more than intensity here. One genuine connection maintained over time is far more protective than dozens of surface level interactions. If you don't have someone in your life right now, then that's okay, but the work is finding one person for you. That might mean joining a group around an interest that you already have, reaching out to an old friend, being willing to be a bit vulnerable with someone that you know but haven't been close to. It could be someone at your local church that you have a coffee with once a week. It could be your next door neighbour who you invite round for food occasionally. And if you're really struggling, then something surprisingly effective is volunteering. Ringing your local charity shop, community centre or food bank, ringing the local Salvation Army or church or mosque and asking if they need an extra pair of hands will more often than not lead to a yes. What happens then is that you're given a small role, you're given a reason to show up, and you naturally start being around the same people regularly. You don't have to be charming, you don't have to be interesting, you just have to turn up. And relationships often grow quietly from there. And something that's come up a lot in the comments of that second video that I mentioned is getting a dog. I love dogs so much, and it makes so much sense if you actually think about it, because now you have something that depends on you, something that's happy to see you all the time, something you need to walk, to feed, to play with, and think about constantly. That alone can meaningfully change your sense of isolation. It's not easy, especially if you're out of practice, but the health returns are enormous. So let me just end with this. You can optimize your diet perfectly. You can exercise consistently. You can sleep 8 hours a night and take every supplement on the market. But if you remain chronically disconnected, you're leaving one of the biggest longevity levers untouched. Social connection isn't a nice to have. It's not a secondary factor. It's a primary driver of health span and lifespan. Strengthening one emotionally safe relationship, just one, can shift your inflammation profile, regulate your stress biology, improve your immune function, and slow your brain aging. Not metaphorically, not as a feel-good side effect, but physiologically. Your body will respond. The research is really clear on this. The mechanisms are understood. What's left is implementation. If you take just one thing from this video, then let it be this. Connection isn't separate from your physical health. It's foundational to it. Prioritize it the way that you prioritize sleep or nutrition, because the evidence says that it matters just as much, if not more.